Hi everyone, welcome back to Real Talk, our campus video series where we talk about relationships, empathy, advocacy, and life. We are happy to join you for a pop-up summer episode. Happy Pride to any and all. We wanted to do an episode related to Pride conversations, to honor those in the LGBTQ plus community. So for those of you who might recognize, we have Cameron, who has been on an episode before. So I wanted to give Cameron a chance to reintroduce himself. And we have a new face, Scott, with us. So I'll give him a chance to introduce himself as well. So Cameron.
Thank you, Cara. Hi, everyone. My name is Cameron. You might have seen me in a previous episode. I use he, him, his pronouns. And I'm a youth educator / sometimes adult trainer with the Women's Center. And I've been there for about a little over a year at this point, so I'm excited to be here and to talk with you all today.
Yeah. Wow, I know. We finally met in person for the first time because you were hired right around the pandemic. So yeah, we're lucky to have you. And we have Scott with us.
Hi, yes. Hi, my name is Scott Towers. I am the coordinator of the Pride Center and the Deputy Title IX coordinator for Western Connecticut State University. I'm new, so I'm excited to be here and to be a part of things like this. I'm a graduate of WestCon, class of 2011, but I'm back, so hi.
I'm back. I love that. Yeah, I bet that's interesting too, coming back during the pandemic and then kind of we'll see transitioning into the fall how that will look. But yeah, welcome. And thank you for joining our little video series, podcast, whatever you may want to call it. So we wanted to, in honor of Pride Month, do an episode related to the coming out process. We're kind of thinking about how, I've seen a lot of articles about more and more millennials and Gen Zers kind of coming out and sharing their identities with families, their communities, friends, etc. And just curious at how the pandemic has created those spaces for reflection and exploration of one's identity and things like that. So I know it's kind of like a large topic, but maybe we can start with just what does it mean to come out? I think we use that term a lot and a lot of people have different definitions of it, different versions of what that means to them. So maybe we can start there.
Go. I can start. My thoughts are, I think it, like you said, Cara, it can look different for different people, but I think sort of at the core of it is in some way, shape, or form telling people in your life sort of how you identify in terms of your sexuality or gender or both, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I also like to remind everyone, because I've naturally gotten the question a lot of when did you come out? And my answer usually is which time? Right. I technically just came out to this group of people right now because you come out sometimes on a daily basis. The fact that I'm wearing a polo with a rainbow Mickey, which is on this side of me, that could be in essence coming out. So really it's up to each person to decide. And unfortunately, a lot of individuals get that decision taken away from them because they're outed. And that's always very frustrating and scary and difficult. But for me, the answer to the question is I officially credit coming out when I told my mom. And that's just how I view the official time, but there's a lot of different definitions of coming out.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that because that is a question I think so many people assume is like they see celebrities who come out and they're coming out to the world essentially when they, announce it through, an article or an interview, because then it's just everyone knows if they're, hearing about that person. But that's not the case for, non-celebrities who have to maybe come out constantly or have to pick and choose when it's safe to come out to different people or in different spaces. And, I have friends or colleagues even who I've worked with in the past who will come out to certain coworkers or colleagues, but choose not to, be out to other, their boss or other people within the workplace. And so it's a very ongoing process, which I think a lot of people maybe don't understand about that, which is very, personal and unique to each person. Personal and unique, yeah.
I think sometimes too, because it's always ongoing, like Scott was saying, that sometimes it can be really draining, like emotionally or just even in many different senses of the word. I know that I sort of I guess first came out this summer after I graduated high school, and it came out to my close friends and then my parents and things like that. And I remember telling my parents, I remember saying, I truly have no desire to sit down every single member of our family and have this conversation over and over again. That just feels like way too much for me. I also wasn't exactly sure, what my full identity was and what I was coming out as. It was just a lot of stuff going on. And I told my parents, I was like, you can do that for me if you choose to accept that, because that's just way too much for me to take on at this time at 17.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate you saying too that you weren't quite sure. I think that's another huge part of the conversation is exploring and allowing it to be fluid. A lot of people are, in the phase of exploration of I might be this, but I haven't really discovered that part of me yet, or going through it. And I choose phase carefully and not indicating that it's just a phase, right? That's the problematic use of that, but I meant in more of the where you're at in your kind of own discovery of your identity, kind of where you're coming from.
And there's so many different variables, and I understand where Cameron's coming, where he says it's draining. I've officially been out of the closet now for over 12 years. And if you had asked me 12 years ago if I considered myself lucky to be a gay man, I would have very quickly said no. And now I see that I'm not only extra comfortable in myself, but I do feel lucky that not only do I know who I am, but I now fit into a label that's established and makes sense to society as a whole. So when I say that I'm a gay man, everyone knows what that means. But if someone says that they're pansexual, people are confused, and then you have to then constantly educate and defend your label, and it's exhausting for so many individuals. So there's so many different variables. But even as a gay man, I find there are many days where I don't want to be the gay guy in the room, and I don't want to have to educate people, and I don't want to have to be explaining my existence and value every single day of my life. Sometimes I just want to be Scott, and I don't necessarily want to talk to people if they can talk to me. So it's an exhausting process that we like to say that we get used to it, but some days you're more comfortable with it, and some days you just need a break.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, the other piece with Pride Month, I think a lot of, because it's rooted in pride and celebration, but also honoring the history of how all of the work to fight for rights, to fight for safety in so many different spaces. There's sometimes, I don't want to say pressure, but a lot of people use it as yes, this is my opportunity to come out, but then there are still people who are afraid to come out in different spaces. And so honoring all sides of that, because of all those reasons that you all both have mentioned so far, of it's exhausting, it's draining, it can be really scary, physically fearing for their safety, by doing that. And so there's so many pieces and layers to it, particularly tied to Pride Month, that you're still valid, even if you are not out yet to your family or your community or, other people in your life. Your identity is still valid no matter what, and your experiences are still valid, because it is very daunting, I think, for people in lots of different ways.
One other point, though, that I do think is really important to talk about is, yes, we use these terms daunting and fear and scary until you do it. Most of the fear is the leading up to the process of actually coming out. Once you do it, even if the worst case scenario happens and you lose family members or you lose most of what you thought your life was before you come out, the term "it gets better," which we now like kind of almost joke about,
Mm.
it is true because you do find a landing space for most of us anyways. And then the problem, and what we have to all remind ourselves, we kind of forget how scary it was before we came out. And then we do this horrible thing to each other in the community where we start to judge others who haven't come out. So, for example, say there may be a young individual that has a lot of characteristics or mannerisms that might lead someone to think that they're a member of the community. I don't want to say all the stereotypes are real because we're not going to go down that road.
Right.
But we as a community tend to, we like to say gaydar, we like to try to figure out who's a member. And then we do this terrible thing of we kind of judge them and think maybe they're too old. They should have come out by now. What's wrong with them? We forget how scary it was. And we forget that everyone's individual experience is so vastly different. So if anyone's watching that's a member of the community, I urge you to remember the fear, because we need to be very careful when we're working with our younger members who just aren't ready yet. And it's okay to not be ready, and shame on us if we're judging them, because how did you feel when you were being judged?
Yeah, absolutely. That was, I'm like, let's like sit with that for a second. But it's so true. Yeah. Well, and I think that it's such, when we're speaking to this, our audience, right, is college students, as WCSU students. And I think it is so interesting to like see the generations that are growing up in, I hear it all the time of like more accepting and more accepting, but that fear is still valid and the nerves are still valid. But I love that you also said like once you get to the other side of that, it does get better for most people. But like leading up to that is really scary. But I do think it's really interesting too. Like I've read so many articles about how many more people are identifying. I mean, they've always been there. It's just like now we feel more comfortable, maybe, or safer, or more able to come out with our identities than previously. And I saw I forget the exact statistic, but I saw an article the other day that was something like, there are more LGBTQ plus people than ever before in the US. And it's like, well, I've always been here, but so it's just really interesting to me, like how, what shifted, or when did it start to shift to, like on the backs of, the people who really started like the riots that started Pride, like, does the current generation that's kind of in college right now, like know all of that history? Like, what more can I learn? What more can we learn to honor where we came from and where we are today, if that makes sense?
The thing that you said, how like what has changed and when has it changed, because I was thinking about how when I came out, when I first came out to people in my life, it was after I graduated high school, so it was the summer of 2013, which isn't that long ago. That's less than 10 years ago, right? I can't do math.
Yeah.
And there was still like almost like compared to today, there was like 1% of the representation in like the conversation of LGBTQ, things going on, like in the, conversations going around the world and TV and things like that. I just feel like it's just part of the conversation more in general. And sometimes it's easier to find community, especially with the internet being bigger. Because when I just graduated high school, like Facebook was still like the it thing, and now no one younger uses Facebook. But, when I work with like youth in high school and even middle school who, I talk to about coming out or just being part of the community, a lot of them have sort of online support groups and things like that, or they're just at least like they're learning about all these terms that I hadn't even heard of until I was like 19 or 20, and here's like a 14-year-old who has an understanding of what it means to be non-binary and things like that. So I think it's just kind of become more part of the conversation publicly, which has led people to have the tools to explore themselves in a way that just wasn't available before, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That's so true. Yeah, one of the good things of technology is access to information and access to people that, I think about like, we're near New York, near Boston, like we have a lot of resources in like this part of the country, but I think a lot about like middle America and elsewhere in the world, you know, where people may feel disconnected or really like isolated, you know, in like their communities, but that because of connections online, you know, they may not feel as isolated, which is really beautiful and awesome.
I absolutely agree with Cameron in that the representation has made a vast difference. I mean, when I was in high school, I mean, there's no question. I knew that I was a gay man in high school, but I would never have admitted it because there was a long history that I watched happen before me that you waited until you graduated, moved away to college, and that's when you came out. And that was what I was going to follow. There was one gentleman that I went to high school with that broke that mold and came out in high school. And it was a horrible experience for him. And so I saw it and was like, nope, not doing that. I'm waiting. And I had so many opportunities to come out in high school, and I actively chose to keep it because it was so crippled with fear. And then it turns out day one of college, I was not ready to come out, even though I thought I was. And that's a whole nother story. But the representation, when I was in high school, the movie Brokeback Mountain came out, which I have yet to meet another member of the LGBTQ plus community that actually likes that movie. I don't like that movie. Most of us did not like that movie. But I do remember the conversation, and I remember the shock and awe of the fact that that movie was coming out. And I happened to work at the Regal Cinema in the town of Brantford, like almost all kids did in that town. And so I was working there at the time that it came out, and it was fascinating to see the reactions of people that were going to see other movies. They were like looking to see who was coming out of the theater. So, you know, so much has changed now. Now it's hard to, I mean, back then it was Brokeback Mountain and Will and Grace. Oh. And Queer as Folk, but Queer as Folk was like taboo and dirty and you weren't supposed to watch it. Now every channel there's at least a gay character because it's just becoming a part of life, which is really exciting. And I know I keep talking, but there's one other thing that I want to say. You know, my family, I was very lucky. My family is very accepting, and it wasn't really a struggle. However, there's still conversations that need to be had within my own family. My own older brother and I have a very difficult relationship now, and watching him raise his young daughter, whom I'm actually the godfather for. It's fascinating because we're not allowed to talk about gayness or sexuality in front of her because he's somehow afraid. And my concept with him has been, if we treat it like it's a dirty, dark secret, they're going to grow up thinking it's a dirty, dark secret. If we treat it like it's just a normal part of life, because it is, then it's going to continue to just be a normal part of life. And what I'm very excited and so encouraged about is for the younger students, for the people in high school now and going into college, it kind of is a normal part of life, which is why suddenly people are coming out so much earlier, and they're not even describing it as coming out. They're just describing it as, I'm just being me, which is this really lovely thing to watch. And I'm stuck in the middle of experiencing kind of what it was before and experiencing what it is now. And it's a fascinating time to be alive because so much is changing. And yes, you need to know your history. You need to know what Stonewall was all about. You need to know pre-Stonewall, Stonewall, post-Stonewall. You need to know why the pink triangles mean something and what it meant on a sleeve of someone in a concentration camp. You need to know these things so that we never forget and we never repeat.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I was thinking too, as you were saying that, and I appreciate you sharing, a bit of your own experiences too with your family. I was thinking about this account on Instagram and I think he's on TikTok too, potentially, but he's a father to a young boy who, at a really young age, fell in love with Elsa from Frozen and started wearing Elsa costumes and everything. And he talks about, he's an author, and he talks about how his idea of masculinity when he was growing up, like all of a sudden was like, oh my gosh, I have to relearn how to not even accept, because the acceptance was always there, but it was like, how do I protect my son, allow him to be his authentic self? And so he ended up like buying an adult Elsa costume and wore it with him. And then he wrote this book. It's so sweet. And he wrote this children's book now. I have to find the name of it, but it's all about like, if you're, it was something like if my shadow is pink or something, and it's like the main character is a young boy, and he's growing up with like his really like traditionally masculine father and all these traditionally masculine things, whatever, but his shadow is like a ballerina, and is really like, because this young boy in real life loves to dance. And then it's all about like accepting your shadow as you, and all. It was just like I'm totally butchering the story, but it's a beautiful story. And this dad just seems so awesome, and his whole like mission now is to educate and spread like love and acceptance and tell other parents, here's how you can have these conversations with your kids, yes, when they're 6 years old and 7, and all those things. So I totally agree. I think the conversations are just becoming more natural for some people, and I don't think there's an age like cap. I feel like, I've seen so many things of like, oh, my grandma was like so accepting of my identity when I came out to her as bi or whatever. And it's like, I think people sometimes assume that, oh, it's the younger generations, but no, there's generations that are, plenty accepting. But obviously there's, maybe more conversation happening. It's more visible in others. So yeah.
I get really frustrated when people are afraid to have conversations with their children because they're too young.
Mm-hmm.
Because oftentimes, or even the phrase, stop putting sex into it.
Right.
It's not about sex or sexuality.
Yeah.
It's about love and acceptance. And so, and even the term, what you do in your bedroom is your business. Well, I don't want to talk about what I do in my bedroom.
Right.
Like that is private.
Yeah.
But being gay is so much more than the bedroom. And that's what's really frustrating me now in my own experience with my niece. I'm not allowed to be myself, which, let me tell you, when I'm being around my family, it is never about the bedroom ever.
Right.
It's upsetting that so many people correlate the LGBTQ plus community with sex and like naughty time. That's not what we are. I mean, sometimes, but like, and we shouldn't be, we should be sex positive creatures. And that's a whole nother conversation. But you don't need to be afraid to talk to your kids about love and acceptance because it involves sex. Don't talk about sex with your kids at that time. Don't do that.
Right. Yeah.
That reminds me, I had a very interesting, I guess you could say, conversation with an older family member. I guess there was some rumor that there was going to be some gay character on SpongeBob. I have no idea if it was true at the time or if it even happened or anything. But she was telling me how she thought that it really had like no place being in SpongeBob, and tried to say it wasn't because the character was going to be gay, but just because that kind of like relationship type thing shouldn't be in SpongeBob. And I was like, okay. I was like, so if you think that topic in general, regardless of it, being gay or straight, shouldn't be in SpongeBob, they need to redo the whole series and get rid of every scene with parents and children, because that is showing, romance. Anytime someone's hugging, anytime someone is doing this. So I was like, what you're really saying is based, in homophobia, whether you realize it or not. That really the only issue, if you break it down, is that this character is gay and not straight. Yeah. So it's always mind-blowing to me how people refuse to talk to their children about it when it's just it's just in our world. Like the fact that, you know, you are the parents of your child, like there's like, I don't know what else to say. So I don't know.
And we shove heterosexuality in people's faces all day long. I mean, like from a really young age, if a little boy is like kissing a little girl on the cheek and we take a photo of it, you know, and it's like, oh my God, how cute. And like we romanticize kids in that way anyway, which is weird in its own thing. But like we're shoving that heterosexuality down people's throats all the time. So it's like, yeah, I totally agree. It's very frustrating, and it doesn't make, well, it makes sense in the way that it is homophobic or transphobic or what, you know, it is not coming from a place of like, oh, you know, that's not appropriate here. It's like, yeah, you think that's not appropriate because you are not accepting that this is a part of someone's identity regardless of what context it's in. You know, I heard a lot growing up too, the like, oh, well, why do they have to be so obvious, or like, why does it have to be so over the top? Or, and I think that's with pride, it's like, heck yeah, be proud, like heck yeah, celebrate. And that's, you know, the whole full circle here is like why there is no straight pride month or whatever people want to call it and all that nonsense. So I think, you know, that's coming to the close of the episode. I was thinking about that, like full circle of like, yes, this is exactly why we need pride and love Pride Month, because people are deserving of taking up space. So any final thoughts as we kind of wrap up our conversation here? I know we have so many things that we didn't get a chance to touch on, but we can always do more and more episodes on this.
I guess just for me, you know, just remember that wherever you are in your coming out process is where you're supposed to be. There's no timeline, there's no deadline. It's just you, and you gotta be you whenever you can be you. You know, very quickly, a very good friend of mine moved away from his family and went through the whole college process and really came out to himself and came out to his whole friend group, but he's not out to his family yet. And when he goes back home, to a very conservative religious family, he doesn't know how to be himself anymore without not being himself. And the truth is he might be ready to come out to them, or he might not be. There's just no deadline, there's no process. Everyone's story is different. So just be you, and whatever that means for you, do it.
Yeah, love that.
I think my last note is I've just seen it, you know, firsthand how fulfilling it can be for people. Like if you feel isolated, you feel like there's no one in your you know, personal physical life that you can have these conversations with, don't underestimate the power and support you can find in online communities. I've just seen it firsthand, like with
No. Oh, okay, we're back. Oh my
You
gosh.
missed some of our best stuff.
It's still recording, I think. So internet. Oh man. Okay, well, at least from where it ended on my end, it says it's still recording. So
Okay.
we didn't just put it out to the universe that everything else was still recorded. But where it cut off on my end, Cameron, is you were just starting to say connection to online communities. So I'm sorry if you have to repeat yourself, but that's
Oh yeah, really all I was saying was that you know, I like don't underestimate the power of finding online support, and there's just so many communities out there in places like Twitter, Discord, Instagram, TikTok, whatever you use. And I've just seen firsthand with a lot of younger people that I work with just finding so much support and like chosen family in those spaces. So if you feel like there's no one in your personal physical life, like in school or your family, that you can really talk to, then search online. Like I promise there are places out there for you.
Yeah, I love that. Well,
And the only thing I added to that was we talked about it gets better. And if it doesn't feel like it's getting better for you, reach out and talk to someone, whether it be one of those online communities, whether it be the Pride Center, whether it be anyone. Just reach out because it can get better.
Yes. On that note, actually, Scott, do you want to give the Pride Center like how to connect and how to get in contact with you all?
Yeah, so we do have a website, and you can just search it from the WestCon main page, or it's just wcsu.edu/Pride Center /. The website is very new, and so I'm trying to update it and get it more functional. But honestly, you can email me. My email is just towerss@wcsu.edu. And then come the fall, it's really going to feel like a full rollout.
Awesome. Yay. Yeah, and you all have an Instagram page too, I know, and everything is still new, but yeah, so active there. And then yeah, hopefully we'll all get to like do in-person things. Fall. But yeah, so thank you both so much for joining. Sorry for the internet mishap towards the end. Hopefully it all works out. But I appreciate this conversation. I appreciate all the work that you both do. And happy Pride to everyone who's watching. Whether you're out in your communities and your spaces or not, we love you. We see you. We're here for you. And yeah, I'm echoing what Scott says. Just be you. And thank you for listening. And we'll see you next time.